On the afternoon of October 18, 1867, on a windswept hill overlooking the harbor of Sitka, a Russian soldier tugged at a halyard, and the Imperial Double Eagle began its slow descent. The flag, battered by years of Arctic storms, snagged in the rigging halfway down and refused to fall as if the Empire itself resisted letting go. A boatswain's chair was rigged, a sailor hoisted up, and the torn banner was cut free, tumbling onto the bayonets of 100 Russian soldiers below. Moments later, the stars and stripes rose over Castle Hill. Russia had just surrendered an empire's worth of territory for roughly 2 cents an acre. Russian America was born of fur and ambition. In 1741, the Danish explorer Vitus Bering, sailing for Tsar Peter the Great, sighted the Alaskan coast and returned with sea otter pelts so exquisite they commanded fortunes in the markets of Canton and St. Petersburg. For more than a century, Russian Promyshleniki fur hunters pushed deeper into this frozen frontier, establishing the colonial capital of New Archangel, today's Sitka, and extending the empire's reach across nearly 600,000 square miles. But the colony was always frail. Never more than 400 permanent Russian settlers inhabited this vast wilderness. Supply lines stretched 6,000 miles across Siberia and the storm-lashed North Pacific. The sea otters were hunted nearly to extinction. By the 1850s, Russian America had become a liability the motherland could no longer afford. Then came the catastrophe that changed everything. Between 1853 and 1856, Russia fought the Crimean War against an alliance of Britain, France, and the Ottoman Empire and suffered a humiliating defeat. The imperial treasury was shattered. The regime owed the equivalent of $1.5 billion rubles. Worse, the war exposed a terrifying strategic reality. If Britain, whose Royal Navy ruled the seas, ever decided to seize Russian America, there was nothing St. Petersburg could do to stop it. The colony lay utterly defenseless. Grand Duke Konstantin Nikolaevich, the Tsar's reform-minded younger brother, became the most ardent voice for divestment. In the event of war with a naval power, he wrote in 1857, "We are not in a position to defend our colony." Meanwhile, Russia's attention pivoted eastward to the newly acquired Amur Basin and the founding of Vladivostok in 1860, territories that offered far more accessible riches than the frozen outpost across the Bering Sea. The question was not whether to sell, but to whom. Selling to Britain, Russia's greatest imperial rival, was unthinkable. But the United States presented an elegant solution. A fast-growing republic that shared Russia's suspicion of British power had recently welcomed Russian naval squadrons to its harbors during its own civil war, and was gripped by an ideology called Manifest Destiny, the conviction that American dominion should stretch from sea to sea. On December 16, 1866, Tsar Alexander II gathered his most trusted ministers in the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. Around the table sat Foreign Minister Gorchakov, Finance Minister Rytern, Naval Minister Crabb, and the Grand Duke himself. The Tsar listened as each man spoke, then delivered his verdict. Russia would sell its North American possessions to the United States. The minimum acceptable price was set $5 million. Baron Edward D. Stokel, Russia's suave and well-connected minister in Washington, was dispatched with instructions to negotiate. On the American side, he found an eager buyer. Secretary of State William Henry Seward, a fervent expansionist who had long dreamed of acquiring Alaska and who saw it as a stepping stone toward American dominance of the Pacific. On the night of March 29, 1867, Stokel arrived at Seward's home on Lafayette Square bearing a cable from St. Petersburg authorizing the sale. Seward, playing whist with his family, pushed the card table aside and declared there was no need to wait until morning. The two men worked through the night, and at 4 in the morning on March 30th, the treaty was signed. The Russian Empire ceded all of Alaska to the United States for $7,200,000 in gold. The Senate ratified the treaty on April 9th by a vote of 37-2. The total price amounted to less than 2 cents per acre. The American public was bewildered. Newspapers ridiculed the acquisition as Seward's Folly, Seward's Icebox, and Wall Russia, a frozen wasteland not worth its weight in rubles. For 30 years, those critics seemed vindicated. The territory languished under neglectful military rule, its vast potential invisible beneath ice and tundra. Then, in 1896, everything changed. Gold was discovered in the Klondike, and 100,000 stampeders surged northward, transforming Alaska overnight into a gateway to untold riches. More was to come. In 1968, the Prudhoe Bay oil field was discovered, the largest in North American history, and the 800-mile Trans-Alaska pipeline began pumping billions of barrels of crude. Strategically, Alaska proved decisive in World War II, providing the only American soil occupied by enemy forces and anchoring the Pacific Defense Line. In 1959, it became the 49th state. For Russia, the sale looked different in retrospect. A continental foothold surrendered, a vast Arctic frontier lost forever to a rival that would become its greatest geopolitical adversary. The sale of Alaska is more than a historical footnote. It is a parable about the blindness of present thinking and the invisible architecture of the future. Alexander II and his ministers made a rational calculation based on the realities of 1867. A bankrupt treasury, a vulnerable colony, a friendly buyer. They could not see the oil beneath the permafrost or the gold in the Klondike gravel, and they could not foresee that the obscure republic they bargained with would one day become the world's dominant superpower, with Alaska as its strategic crown jewel in the Arctic. History rewards not those who think in years, but those who think in centuries. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and strike the bell, and tell us in the comments, what historical folly do you think future generations will judge differently?